tomorrow.
Yeah, that's fine. Risk and flood.
That's great.
No, it's
He's had the idea of looking into my income. Sorry?
no, yes.
Unfortunately, the moral victory doesn't come with a trophy.
Miss Vickery, the court office has just gone to get her honour.
Okay, thank you.
Coronial courthouse status resumed. Please be seated.
Your Honour, I've apologised to Miss Vickery for that technical difficulty that's resulted in the delay. Miss Vickery, I'll try and go as promptly as I can do. I just wanted to ask you briefly about IRT and TRG before I move back to some themes. You explain in your first record of interview with police when you're talking about the TRG, I'll just quote you at page 9, I don't have a very tactical brain. It's not an area it's not one of my strength areas. So anytime I've sort of had to do one of those things, I will always call the TRG superintendent.
Yes.
And then in relation to the IRT, similarly, given their tactical or strategic deployment, you would rely on other people in your command in relation to the IRT, is that right?
Yeah, so what I generally do is I'd sort of write down, I'll come up with what I think would have to happen, and then I would speak to somebody else who had more expertise in that matter, in that way, and then I'd say, right, have I missed anything? Is there something I need to think about?
And the head of the IRT during your period of time as superintendent was Lee Bowens?
Yes, that's correct.
And he was a sergeant you had expectations would abide by the values of the Northern Territory Police Force, correct?
Yes.
And you have given evidence, I think in that first statement again, that there was no formal risk assessment process that went on. So it goes to Brad, meaning Brad Curry, and there's usually a verbal conversation about what's happening, etc. So it would really be a matter where Sergeant Bowens would be, you would have the expectation that he'd be running the IRT efficiently, effectively, and professionally. Is that right?
Yes.
And you certainly given evidence that you trusted him to be a good example of leadership and mentoring.
Yes.
Was that the same case with the sergeant who has the initial CV, who I referred to you about earlier?
Yes.
You've since been sent a message with his full name on it, is that right?
I had a conversation, yes.
All right. And that's exactly who you thought I was referring to before the break when I was asking you about that person?
Yes.
And were any concerns raised with you as to his propensity to violence on the job?
So he's been gone for quite some time, so I'll have to really stretch back. I don't recall the propensity, that word you said, to violence, but he was having some issues with his mental well-being, and we were sort of focused on his welfare. But I can't recall specific incidents of violence or complaints in relation to his use of force.
He was someone who was active, as in working in 2019 when Constable Rolfe was working. Is that correct?
I believe so.
There's an exchange between that person and Constable Rolfe on the 14th of October, where CV writes, "It's going to sound weird, bro, in the nicest way, of course. Glad someone thinks the way I do and I'm not going mad." Constable Rolfe replies, "Nah, I feel exactly the same, man. Cut from the same cloth. I've only talked to you and Sykesy about my head, but even he doesn't get violent like us. But you're not mad, we're just different than normal folk." Does it surprise you, any exchange where Constable Rolfe was suggesting to CV that Sykesy, he's talked to Sykesy about his head, but even Sykesy doesn't get violence like you, CV, and me, Constable Rolfe?
Yeah, well, I hadn't experienced Cam like that. I'm sorry, I've got to like really sort of think back, because I think when he went off, he was working in the youth area, like with our youth engagement team from memory. But I can't remember. But it surprises me that they would be like that. That issue was happening, and we hadn't been advised about it.
Miss Vickery, if one of your constables in Constable Rolfe's position, I withdraw that. If you would expect, wouldn't you, that if a constable raised with a sergeant that he had problems with his head and was getting violent, that sergeant would take action to assist the officer first?
Absolutely.
And would raise any concerns with that sergeant's superiors, the senior sergeant or yourself?
Well, that would generally be the process. So I would hope so.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you? Because otherwise members of the public might be put at risk.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen. In fact, CV didn't ever raise that issue with you, correct?
Not that I don't recall anything about anything like that.
And your understanding was that CV himself had identified mental health issues for him?
Yeah, I believe that was one of the reasons he went on leave. He recognised it in himself.
I think you gave evidence before the lunch break that your view was, at least until this inquest, that in terms of any use of force complaints, it might have involved a small number of young officers.
No, that's not what I was talking about.
Were you talking about the use of racist language?
Yes.
And your view, or what is your view still, that involved a small number of young officers?
Well, I think I said to you that young officers was the wrong word, but there was a group, I would call it maybe a clique, a group of people, like-minded people that were all hanging out and friends and in workmates, and that, they exchanged those comments and text and behaviours, but I certainly do not believe that was with it, in the wider group of the police station.
All right. Well, let me just remind you now of some of the things we know as a result of this inquest. We know Claudia Campanero has given evidence on Friday where she said that racist language was frequently spoken and used in the station in Alice Springs when she worked there throughout 2018, and she specifically acknowledged that the words coon and nigger were the kinds of words that were used, freely spoken in the Alice Springs Police. You say you never heard those words. They weren't spoken of in front of you.
No, because they are two words that I detest and abhor.
She said it was the case that superior officers like sergeants were also using that language freely. She specifically nominated Sergeant Bowens and Sergeant Kirkby as freely using that racist language. And that comes as a surprise to you, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
That is consistent, isn't it? The fact that they would speak that language is consistent with what you saw on the text exchanges that also took you by surprise, correct?
Yes.
And you can't possibly say then, can you, that the use of that racist language is isolated to one group of young friends who were workmates and a clique?
But you can't say that it's the whole police station either.
Just focus on my question, if you don't mind. The use of that language, and I just have to remind you, it also, on these text exchanges also involved racist exchanges where between Mitch Hansen, another constable, and Zachary Rolfe. You're aware of that?
Yes, and that one really surprised me because he would not normally do that sort of behaviour. Like I'd never, I was completely shocked with that one.
It also involved exchanges between Mark Sykes and Constable Rolfe that were racist in nature. You understand that?
Yep.
And did that shock you?
They all shock me.
All right. So I'll just go back to your evidence. It was a clique, it was a like-minded group of friends and workmates. But in fact, what we know as a result of this inquest is that it was, at the very least, Mark Sykes, Mitch Hansen, Sergeant Bowens, Sergeant Kirkby. So you couldn't possibly say, could you, that this was restricted to a small group of young officers who were workmates in a clique? You just can't say that it's isolated like that.
Well, but I'm wondering, were they all on the same patrol group?
Well, Sergeant Bowens wasn't on that patrol group, was he?
I don't know. I'd have to have a look at a roster and see where they all fit in at that point.
The facts, Miss Vickery, that you were so surprised and appalled that people that you know and trusted engaged in that racist language suggests to you, doesn't it, that you don't know how many others were engaged in that racist language because it wasn't used in front of you and no one brought it to your attention.
Yeah, that's a fair comment.
Similarly, with respect to Constable Rolfe filming body-worn video footage on his phone and then sending it on to civilians, that surprised you?
That astounded me. I've never heard that happening.
And you don't know whether it was done by other officers in his patrol group or other officers in Alice Springs, do you?
Well, I'm not aware of it, so I can't know about that, can I?
But given that nobody brought to your attention the racist language, it may well be that was happening more frequently and no one brought that to your attention either.
That is a potential scenario, yes.
And then there's Constable Rolfe texting a sergeant saying, there's something, thanks for talking to me about what's going on in my head. Not even Sykesy gets violent like you and me. And that wasn't brought to your attention. Does that concern you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it confounds me that people would let that sort of thing go.
In relation to my final questions, in relation to the use of force issues, in your second interview, which I took you to earlier, you said this at page 7. You were referring to the fact that Constable Rolfe was involved in many of the matters where the body-worn video was not turned on. And you say he was obviously involved in a lot of those ones, but, he has a really high work rate. He's always the go-to person if you want something done and, quickly and effectively and efficiently. Then he was often the one that you would sort of say, hey, we really need to locate this person. And, he had a really good work ethic.
Yep.
Those are important qualities in a police officer, aren't they? That he got the job done and he had a good work ethic and he had a high work rate is how you describe him.
Yes, but I would have expected he did it within the values of our organisation.
You go on to say over the page, I don't think it came up. I can't recall a specific conversation. This is in relation to the CMT process and the propensity of complaints. I don't think it came up. I can't recall a specific conversation. I don't think it came up to say, oh, we're red flagging him or anything. You know, there might have been discussions where we've sort of said he's coming up and, you know, we're monitoring, but I don't recall anything particularly about it. When you look back on this, Miss Vickery, and you reflect on what Miss Reid was drawing to your attention, can I suggest to you there were red flags that were raised with you given his non-adherence to the body-worn video policy, the occasions of people fleeing from him and the injuries ascertained, and the findings of Judge Borchers that he had lied in the Ryder matter? They were red flags in relation to Constable Rolfe.
That could be considered that, yes.
Do you think, in looking back on it, that because you placed such great weight on his abilities, his tactical abilities and his high work rate, you didn't sufficiently prioritise those red flags?
I think looking back at it with the information that I have now, then I could have looked at it a little bit harder, yes.
And then just, I'm asking for your reflections here as an experienced superintendent, looking back on it, even with the information you had being raised at the CMT, which included Judge Borchers' findings about him lying, insufficient attention was given to the risks, the red flags that were being raised about Constable Rolfe's behaviour.
I don't know. I'd say it was insufficient attention. I would say that I don't know that I would say it was insufficient intention. It was just maybe a different way I could have did the practice of that I did.
All right.
Rather than wait outcomes, I could have potentially been a little bit more, used a bit more initiative.
I'm going to suggest to you, and I'm not doing this to give you a hard time, I'm asking you to reflect on it so that we can learn for next time. I'm going to suggest to you that you should, irrespective of the outcomes of the PSC, it was incumbent on the superintendent in your position to monitor his behaviour once those red flags were raised by Superintendent Reid, and that was not sufficiently done. Do you accept that?
Well, not completely, but that you're welcome to suggest it, and I think we can all do things better. So, yeah.
Nothing further, Your Honour. Oh, certainly.
Well, Ms Vickery, my name's Philip Bolton. I'm a barrister. I'm appearing for Narja. You're familiar with Narja?
Yes.
They acted for the 14-year-old boy in the bin, Mr Ryder, Cleveland Walker, Luke Madrill, the man who was pushed into a wall at the council chambers, the young solicitor who sent many complaints to the police services, the police about your officer's behaviour. That's Narja, okay?
Yes, I know who you're talking about.
Certainly. So I want to ask you about cultural awareness. And your experience here in Alice Springs. I think Alice Springs has people living here from every corner of the Central Desert, right?
Yes.
With many
some people from the top end as well.
Sorry?
And some people from the top end as well.
There are many different languages spoken in Alice Springs.
Yes.
The cultures, even compared to the Barkly region, are noticeably different than here in the area 200 or 300 kilometres radius around Alice Springs.
Yes.
It's a complex population to police, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
How many police in Alice Springs, say in the 5 years before you left, could speak any of the languages of the people in this region?
There was a few.
Yeah?
Yep.
How many, approximately?
I can't tell you off the top of my head. We didn't do a tally of them, but I know there was one that spoke quite fluent, but I can't remember which one he spoke.
You can't remember what language it was?
No, I think it was like from the people out around Harts Range, that area, I think. Because he'd spent a lot of time out in those communities.
Okay. What about Aranda speakers? How many of them?
I cannot give you the information you have. I don't have that information. I don't know.
You've worked here since 2013. If you give us an impression, as best you can, at any one time, were there 2, 3, 8, 4, whatever?
I don't know.
Did you ever go to any language classes to learn any language other than English?
No.
Were you interested in learning any languages?
I was, and I tried to pick up a few different words, but I could never pronounce them properly, and the ladies used to laugh at me.
That's terrible that they laughed at you.
I did try.
But do you know where to go to learn a language like Aranda or Warlpiri or
Yep, they had
Luritja?
classes. They had classes at CSC.
How many
That's
police went to those sorts of those classes?
I don't know. It wasn't a mandatory thing. If people wanted to do that in their own time, they did. But there was a record like that you could send. They every now and then would send a thing saying that if you can speak a certain language to send it through, that HR used to put it in it. But again, it wasn't something that was reported back to us.
Were there any positions, apart from ALOs and ACPOs, were there any positions in the Alice Springs Command that were set aside specifically for Aboriginal people?
As in what capacity? I'm not quite sure what you're asking me.
Okay, so in the Northern Territory Public Service, there's this concept of special measures positions where the merit principles are secondary and where the position is dedicated to any Aboriginal person who is suitable for the job. Was there any such mechanism in the police?
I don't believe so, no.
When your colleagues were sitting for exams, was there any particular steps taken to positively encourage Aboriginal candidates for advancement?
Yeah, so at the college they had a unit that are you talking about in general, or you're talking about Alice Springs?
Well, I'm talking about your understanding of how things worked here in Alice Springs, and talking about police who are already sworn police officers who might be contemplating an advancement in rank. Was there any program, measure or step that was taken to encourage someone who's an Aboriginal candidate or potential candidate to step up for the exams?
So there wasn't any program, but when the exams would come up, I would send out emails to the whole station, and so we didn't encourage Aboriginal people any differently than we would have encouraged non-Aboriginal people. If people wanted to get promoted, then they would come and discuss it with us, and then, you know, I would make myself available to work through anything or help them with their study programs, or you know, give them some mentoring through that process. But there was nothing formal.
You said several times today that you don't treat people on the basis of their race and that you treat people equally. And that's a very commonly held set of principles that are acknowledged and respected. But are you also aware of a set of principles that suggest that there are some people in the community who are relatively disadvantaged and that they need separate and different treatment to people who are not so disadvantaged? Are you aware of that idea?
I would, but I would suggest that given the Aboriginal police officers have gone through the same training and passed the same tests and passed the same physical and educational skills that we have at our police college, that it would, some of them would be insulted if we did that.
You think it would be insulting to provide some sort of encouragement and mentorship to Aboriginal people?
No, I'm not saying that it's...
But not something different than white people, is that what you're saying?
I am not saying that they would be insulted about mentoring. Like, mentoring was something we do. I'm saying that if you're suggesting that we had a separate promotion or system for Aboriginal people that made it easier or was different to what everybody else did, then that some of them may find that offensive, and that we were thinking that they were not of the same intelligence that the other members were, when they've literally passed the same obstacles that everybody else had to get to where they got to.
Ms Vickery, I'm not suggesting that Aboriginal people be given a lower pass mark in the exams, or that they be given a job that they're not suited to. What I'm asking you to consider is that there might be positive measures taken to encourage people and give them support in their endeavours to pass the exams and get the jobs that they don't actually have. Do you understand the difference?
I understand that you think there's a difference, but I'm saying that we provide I provided that same encouragement and mentoring and that for all of the members, including my Aboriginal police officers.
I'm not going to harp on this is all I'll ask about it, but lawyers in the Northern Territory have the benefit of a scheme where Aboriginal law students receive a special encouragement to get through their exams, to be mentored and to become Aboriginal lawyers in the Northern Territory. Is there not a similar thing that might help to get the numbers of Aboriginal police officers even higher than what they are now, Ms Vickery?
I'm failing to see that having Aboriginal people getting any different, like if everyone gets the same mentoring.
Got it.
I don't really understand where you're coming from.
No, I think you just disagree with where I'm coming from, but that's fine.
It's not that I'm disagreeing. It's just I think that our police officers, whether they're Aboriginal or not, have all gone through the same process to get to where they are.
Okay,
And there are non-Aboriginal the people who don't do well in their exams. as
Yeah,
well.
okay. So, Ms Vickery, as I understand the standard operating procedures for the IRT, you had a special role in administering the IRT. Have I got that right or wrong?
Yeah, I had a role in administration of it, yes.
The officer in charge of the IRT was required to consult you about when a member of the IRT was fit to serve or not, correct?
That's correct. According to the policy, yes.
Yeah. And I want to know whether or not you were ever asked to consider the fitness of any person to be in or remain in the IRT whilst you were the divisional superintendent.
No,
You were never asked.
no,
Okay, so did you ever ask anybody about whether anyone was fit or unfit to be in the IRT?
I never, no,
So what about Mr Bowens? Did you ever check to see if he was fit to be the leader of the IRT? Ms Vickery?
well, as I've explained to the other council, that, in my dealings with him, he didn't give me cause not to
Okay,
think
so
he wasn't.
as I understand the standard operational procedures, after the deployment of the IRT in any particular task, there was to be a debriefing. Do you understand that, or have I got that right?
Yes, that's in IRT or any critical incident that we do, we do a briefing.
The debriefings the SOPs concerning debriefing, the IRT, required that issues or recommendations arising from the debriefing should be forwarded to you and the Territory Support Superintendent and Specialist Services. Have I got that right?
Can you tell me which paragraph you're talking about?
1.2.2.
Okay, that's what it says, yes.
Did you ever attend any IRT debriefings?
I don't, not the IRT specifically. If there is a debrief in my area, I would generally attend them. And if we couldn't do them physically because everybody would be there, we would get them to provide the feedback via email, and then we'd discuss them at a debrief. But the majority of the IRT deployments weren't done in Alice Springs, they were done in other areas.
Well, that's why I'm asking you about it, because Superintendent Nobbs made it absolutely clear that it was not his job to be involved in supervising the IRT, that it was your job. And according to the SOPs, it is your job to be involved, it was your job to be involved in debriefing issues. So that's why I asked. You
Yeah,
never-
no,
never once went.
But I would suggest that if I wasn't involved in debriefs, that
Yeah.
happened in another division.
Well,
So if
yeah.
and I understand what you're saying and what he's saying, but if an incident happens in the Southern Command area or in Tennant Creek and the IRT members go, I wouldn't be involved in that debrief because I have nothing to do with that operation or what had happened. So the debriefing should be done by the superintendent who was in charge of that incident. So if they had called out, like had got approval for the IRT to go, then the debriefing should have been done. Even like doesn't sort of say that very well in the policy.
Doesn't say
but
it at all in the policy. It's not in the policy. And it's not what happened, because if we accept what Mr. Nobbs says, he didn't do it. So did you think he was doing it?
Well, that would be the just normal standard thing that would happen. Like,
what do you mean by that? Do you mean you know it happened, or do you don't know it happened and you assume that it happened, or what are you talking about?
I would imagine. Well,
Please don't imagine. Could you just tell the court what happened?
So, what happened was, if something happened in an area outside of Alice Springs, I was not involved in the debrief unless I was involved in the actual operation.
That's fine. So if Mr. Nobbs says that he didn't supervise or debrief, then the court can accept that it didn't happen if the operation was deployed outside of Alice Springs. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, according to Mr. Nobbs, that would be what happened then.
So what about in Alice Springs? Did you receive reports, recommendations, or notice of issues that arose during the course of deployment of the IRT in your command?
So if that was in my division and there was an incident that had happened, then I would generally have been involved in the debriefing, or I would have been appraised of it. But there wasn't many that IRT were deployed in debrief that I'm aware of.
During the time that you were the superintendent, how many times was the IRT deployed in Alice Springs?
I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Roughly.
Well, I know only the one that I asked for them to be deployed. There may have been some that were happening when I was on leave. I think they got deployed to a couple of siegey type situations, but I couldn't tell you even roughly because I don't know.
Right, so the one that you can remember, is that the one that you used to say I was involved in debriefings?
Yeah, so we may not have done it as like everybody came into the room and talked about it.
Yeah, okay. What about the siegey type situations that happened when you were on leave? Were you involved in any debriefings in relation to those issues?
No, because I wasn't there.
But you were the superintendent, and it says that issues or recommendations go to the superintendent.
Yes, but if I'm on leave, and I'm not the superintendent, when I'm on leave, there's somebody else doing that job.
Well, was there a central repository for information concerning the administration of the IRT at Alice Springs Police Station?
Yeah, so they had a folder on our local drive that they could put their information in. And did you
maintain that drive?
So that was maintained. That folder was maintained by Sergeant Bowen, but it was like other people you could look at it.
General access.
Yeah.
Okay. So. Did you regard yourself in the line of command above Mr. Bowen's so far as the IRT operations were concerned?
Yeah, so I was there was Sergeant Bowens and me in relation to the administration.
Did you help to formulate the training program?
No,
Did you know what the training program was?
no,
Was there any document that set out what the training program was?
when Lee would run a course, he would provide a timetable of what they did.
Yeah, but that is beside the point. Was there some scheme or plan that dictated what training members of the IRT should undertake?
Yes, I believe there was, but that wasn't the area that I was involved in.
No, but did you check it?
No, because it wasn't the area that I was responsible for.
Well, why do you say that? Because you were the superintendent who was supervising the IRT, were you not?
I was responsible for the administration side of it, but the training
not
was,
administration.
the training was conducted through the TRG.
The TRG did not dictate what happened in the IRT, did it?
No, but they worked with initially Sergeant, the first Sergeant, and then Sergeant Bowens after that. They worked on the training, and all the training records were held in the TRG.
Why were the training records held at the TRG when you were the superintendent that was in charge of the IRT?
Because they have a program there that they use for their tactical type training, and that's why it was done there. I didn't have access.
Did you have any opinion about whether the training was adequate for the task?
No, I didn't have an opinion because I wasn't involved in that side of it. From what I could tell, the members were well trained in what they were doing.
The standard operating procedures required membership of the IRT to be exemplary, correct?
What one are you looking at now?
Well,
Does it use that word?
no, it doesn't use that word. What it does say at 4.2 is that the IRT will be expected to have a higher standard of tactical awareness and weapons handling skills than general duties members. It is expected that IRT members display a high standard of professionalism and behaviour fitting their role. And it is expected that members are performing to a high standard in their primary role and that their participation in the IRT is not detrimental to this performance. It says all of those things, you'll agree?
Yes.
Then it also says that members who are the subject of disciplinary action will be stood down during the investigation or subsequent penalty period at the discretion of the Commander, Southern Command, in consultation with the OIC IRT and Alice Springs Divisional Superintendent. Says all of that. Do you agree with that?
Yes, that's what it says.
And it also says that the OIC of the IRT, in consultation with the Divisional Superintendent, may at any time stand down a member who, due to personal or stress-related issues, should not be put into the tactical environment, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so just to take up briefly some of the issues that you have already touched upon in your evidence, by at least September 2019, you were aware of a number of issues that called into question Zachary Rolfe's suitability to continue in the IRT, right?
Sorry, somebody coughed over you and I couldn't hear what you were saying.
Yeah, I appreciate the problem. By at least September 2019, you were aware of a number of issues that called into question Zachary Rolfe's suitability to remain a member of the IRT, right?
Yes.
What did you do about it?
Well, a number of those issues were under investigation.
That's all understood.
Yes.
That's all understood. What did you do about it?
I suppose I was waiting for the outcome of those investigations before I would have considered discussing whether or not he should be removed.
Did you not even have a quiet word with Mr. Bowens?
It never came up.
Standard operating procedures allowed for action prior to the determination of disciplinary investigations, right?
Yes.
Did you ignore that, didn't think of it, or decided that this was not an appropriate case to take action?
No, I just didn't think of it. That was my failing. I didn't think of it. I'll accept that.
Going back to complaints, would it be fair to say that the vast majority of complaints generated against your members were initiated by lawyers at Narjar or before Narjar was here, Carlos?
Yeah, most of the complaints come through the legal people.
Vast majority of them, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And you were cynical about those complaints in part because they were generated by lawyers who were acting for the complainants. Agreed?
No, I was cynical about one particular lawyer who generated more complaints in the short time that he was there than any of the other lawyers that I'd been dealing with for several years. It was just relentless.
Was this a lawyer in Alice Springs or in Darwin?
I don't know. I'm pretty sure there was somebody in Darwin. The Narlis lawyers were still based in Alice Springs.
Was it a man or a woman?
It was a male, I think. It was a while ago.
Well, were these complaints given different treatment than any of the other complaints that
Most of the complaints I'm talking about were the CRP complaints, and there's a process for that was followed, regardless of whether we thought that they were complaints that were being reported by by an overzealous lawyer.
Well, how did you know that the lawyer was overzealous? Was it because of the pattern of complaints, the number of complaints, or because they were baseless complaints?
Well, initially, obviously, when they were coming through, we were looking at it, and then the majority of them, when we looked into them, were not substantiated and were minor. So I'm not talking about ones where people were injured or, they were spoken to, with harshly, or they were, a range of complaints that came through, and it was just it was almost we were dealing with a lot of issues with youth at that point, and it just seemed that every time that there was interactions, we were getting complaints. It was making it very difficult all around.
So you've shown a video of a boy in a bin earlier today.
Mm-hmm.
You never became aware of that one, it would seem, until you were asked to review it for the purposes of your evidence. Is that right?
Yeah, but that one didn't come through as a CRP complaint.
Nor was it the subject of a use of force form, I suggest. What do you say about that?
It would appear it wasn't.
Should it have been?
Given the circumstances, I think so, yes.
Well, given the circumstances in that force was used, it should have been the subject of a use of force complaint, right?
That's what I said.
That's what you meant. Were you on the same wavelength? When you were asked about this earlier today, there were some aspects of the video that eventually you came to agree were unacceptable, but there were some aspects of the video which initially you sought to not offer a view about or to offer a guarded view about. And in the course of your evidence, you suggested essentially that you knew a bit about this fellow, and you suggested he was known for violence. So I want to ask you about that, madam.
You can call me Pauline, but that's okay.
Pauline, then. Pauline, this
Yes.
man, we have checked, had no convictions for violence at any time prior to the date of that video. Do you agree, disagree, or don't know?
Well, I don't know if he had any convictions, but that doesn't mean that he hadn't used violence.
Right. And do you suggest, even if so, that there was justification in tipping the bin over in the way that we saw Mr. Rolfe do it?
As I said, I don't know what they were thinking, why they did that. It isn't probably what I would have done, but I don't know what was going through their thought process is in relation to doing it that way. But it wouldn't have been how I would have done it unless there was sort of if he was not going to comply and wasn't talking or got angry. I wouldn't have done it that way.
Ms. Vickery, this might not be fair, reject it if you will, but it sounded very much like if this one had been the subject of a complaint by an Arja lawyer and that you had reviewed it, any time and around about it happening, you would not have taken any action against the man who tipped the boy out of the bin, would you?
It's not a fair thing, and I would have looked into it. I would not have dismissed it. It would have been investigated by somebody.
Done what? What would you have done?
Well, it depends on the outcome of what the investigation.
So we'll put that young man to one side. The complaint mechanism that you were a part of, and which still exists in the Northern Territory, involves a chain of review where the person at the top of the chain reviews what a number of people have done below them in the chain without the person at the top of the chain necessarily or usually doing anything else to check other than to accept what's been done by the first person who checked the source information. Do you agree?
So we're talking about complaints against the police or the use of force?
Complaints against police.
So generally, somebody will be allocated the complaint to investigate. And then that person will do the investigation and then provide a report back to the superintendent. We'll look at it and it goes to the commander from memory, and then it goes to PSC for the final oversight.
So when this morning you were asked specifically about a particular review that came to you, you told the court that your determination was, and I think these are your words, quote, wholly reliant on the watch commander or watch commanders.
So that was a use of force review, not a complaint against police review.
Okay, well, in relation to that one then,
Yeah.
without any regard to any contrary version or different version, you would have regard to what the watch commander concluded.
Yes.
Did you ever, either in a use of force audit or in any complaint mechanism review, either as part of the complaint resolution process or any other complaint mechanism, interview the complainant?
Did I personally interview them?
That's what I'm asking.
Not unless I was the investigating officer. That's not the process.
No, it's not. And
Yeah.
when you say, not unless I was the investigating officer, when you were the investigating officer, were you the superintendent? Did you carry out any?
Sometimes.
Okay. So when you carried out investigations as part of was it part of a complaints resolution process?
Generally.
And when you interviewed the complainant, was it before or after the conciliation process was reached, or was it part of the resolution, or was it part of the investigation?
Sometimes I usually speak to the person when we got the complaint and get what had happened, and then I would go back and talk to the members, and then I would sit down and we would with the person who complained and go through this conciliation process with both sides of the story, and to get an outcome for that.
How often did that happen?
Not very often as a superintendent, because they get delegated down. But when I was a sergeant and senior sergeant, I had to do it quite a few.
All right. When you were the superintendent, you became aware that Mr. Rolfe made a number of applications to join the TRG, right?
Yeah.
You said in your interview of the 30th of November 2019 that he applied, you thought, at that time on 2 or 3 occasions, but he didn't get appointed on those occasions. Is that your memory now?
Yes.
You said at page 27 that there were other people who got the positions over him because of merit or having worked in remote stations and part of the selection process. So he'd been actively trying to get into that role, right?
Yes.
You were interviewed again in February 2020 when you told Mr. Morgan that Zach had passed the TRG assessment in 2019, that he put in a number of applications for the TRG. You said that I have to provide sponsors for. So in his earlier ones, I'd said that I felt that he needed to do more GD's work before he got into a specialist role. So that's in your interview at page 24, Ms. Vickery, okay?
Yeah. I'm just trying to find it. Hang on.
Page 24, halfway down the page.
Sorry, that one's on my computer and it's jumped off. So just bear with me for a minute. Well,
How you going there? You got it?
I've just got to search it up. It was down the bottom.
Sorry? It's in the interview of the 11th of February 2020.
Yeah. I've read it. I've got just that you used the word sponsored, and I don't remember. I don't know if that's the word I should have used.
There you go. You found it?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for it to come up. Stand by. I apologise. So can you just say what page it was again?
Yeah, page 24, halfway down the page.
Okay. Right, yep.
Why did you talk to Mr. Roth and suggest that it wasn't time for him to go into the TRG?
Why did I talk to him?
Why did you suggest to him that it wasn't time yet for him to get a job in the TRG?
Why did I talk to Zach?
Why did you talk to Zachary Rolfe and tell him it wasn't yet time for him to take up a job in the TRG?
So on the third occasion when I spoke with him and he didn't get in, I hadn't recommended. I know the second occasion I hadn't recommended him, and I was informed that he was quite upset that I think it was the second one that he wasn't getting in. So I went down and had a conversation with him because I had also spoken with the sergeant in TRG at the time and had a conversation with him about, well, you know, he's only just passed the course, you know, is he going, like, you know, his expectation was he'd passed the course so he should be able to get into TRG. So that was what I wanted to talk to him about, because I felt that his expectations were to like a bit above about what would actually happen.
Why didn't you think he should get in the TRG?
So on the two occasions when I didn't recommend him, I just felt that it's really important that members get a good grounding in the frontline policing before they go into specialist areas.
You said on the next page that the last application he put through, you did recommend him because you'd seen the sort of change in him and the maturity that he was starting to show.
Yes.
Okay? So
yes.
in what areas did he lack maturity or fitness for the TRG that led you to recommend against his appointment when you did?
Well, I think earlier that if I'd sort of spoken to him earlier in relation to thing, or you know, if I was talking to them about if we were sort of doing jobs and I was having a conversation, I would often sort of feel like that I was being listened to, but I was being tolerated rather than, and they weren't really taking on board what I was trying to say.
Who's that? You mean Zach?
Oh, yeah, not just Zach. There were, you know.
He was one of them.
Well, he was one of them.
Yeah, okay.
So
go on.
So, yeah, so, and so, you know, we talked about that if, you know, I talked to the supervisors and senior sergeants if I have concerns about behaviours, and I asked them to address them. I started to see a change in Zach in how he presented himself in relation to, you know, he was listening. He was, you know, you could see that he was actively, like the body worn was starting. He was putting that on more, like, and doing that now. So where, you know, where we were having those issues before, I could see that he was starting to go, all right, this is what I need to be doing.
When he was just sorry, I think you've said enough for me to ask the next question, and I wanted to ask you about his attitude that you thought was just tolerating you when you were talking to him.
Yeah, it's not just
You
him.
were talking to him about what? Like not wearing his body worn, or what? What were you talking to me about that you thought, he's not really, he's just tolerating me? What was that about, Ms. Vickery?
So it wasn't necessarily just him on his own. It was often sort of, you know, at the training days.
What was the topic that was barely tolerated?
Well, it wasn't necessarily a specific topic.
Just generally?
Well, in the training days, we talk about a number of things. So it was like, and I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but often when I would speak with, like, the members, they, you know, you sort of sometimes felt like, oh, you know, here we go again.
Can I ask you this?
Get another lecture.
Can I ask you this? Do you think that he disregarded you in part, at least, because you're a woman? I don't know. Yeah.
If he did, he certainly wasn't on his own.
Eh?
If he did, he certainly wasn't on his own.
Well, can I just add these things? We've got him on videotape saying foul things about a woman. We've got him on text messages saying foul things about women. The videotape I'm talking about is the one where he is viewing on his phone and filming him in the car with a colleague just before he jumped out and pushed two drunk men over on the ground out at the Araluen Park. All right? You remember seeing that?
Yeah, I saw the video, yes.
Okay, so he's in the car and he says foul things about a woman that the two men have just seen outside the car.
Yeah, I couldn't hear that very well.
Okay, I'm not
so-
going to repeat it because I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, that's
but-
fair enough.
All right, they're talking about a woman, they're talking about what they're seeing and how they're talking about a woman. Zach's talking about a woman. And we got it in writing in his text messages. He disregards women with his colleagues, men particularly. You picked it up that he and others disregarded women, right? We got this right?
Disregarded me. I couldn't talk for everyone, but based on what you're saying, that would be a fair comment.
And unlike the shielding of you from racist views and attitudes, did you get the sense that some men in your police station gave you less deference because you're a woman?
Yes. And not just at the junior levels.
And I'm afraid not just in the police station either, I bet.
What do you mean? Oh, what do you mean?
It's a very common attitude in the community everywhere to give less respect to women in authority than men in authority. Do you agree?
Yes.
I think I've had enough time, Your Honour.
Thank you, Your Honour. Ms Vickery, I only have a couple of questions for you. Do you know when it was? I'm sorry, I'm Paula Moreau. It's a bit late in the day. I'm sure you're tighter than I am. Paula Moreau, I'm acting for the Brown family in this matter.
Okay.
Family of Kumanjayi Walker.
Okay.
Now, can you tell us when it was that you recommended him on his final TRG application? How long before he shot Kumanjayi Walker that was?
I don't think it was very long, but I can't give you an actual date. I'm not sure.
It must have been fairly close in time to then, correct? Because
It wasn't. Yeah, it was. Probably within a month or two, I think.
I see. And so you saw a change in him and the maturity that he was starting to show in a positive light at the same time that you were accumulating your awareness of the number of complaints and issues that were being raised with you by ethical standards.
So they were all earlier, so the allegations of those things all came through earlier. And as I said, it was taking a very long time for those investigations to happen. So in between then, you could see that he was starting his behaviour was changing. Maybe it was because he was being complained about, maybe it was investigated and he was, trying to do better, but I did see a change in his behaviours.
I see. But these were still some complaints that were occurring in 2019, weren't they?
Yep.
Yeah. So we're still talking in the same year.
Yep.
Okay. So not only did you not think of reviewing his fitness for service for the IRT, correct?
Yes.
But you, in fact, promoted him for a tactical position with the TRG.
I didn't promote him at all. I gave him the support. It then goes through a panel of other independent people.
Sure, you provided a positive recommendation for him.
I said that I recommended him.
Okay. The second topic is a matter that you spoke about in relation to your last role in the police force in training. I just wanted to ask you about that. through the probationary training and cadet program, I understand you were involved in your last position in the police force. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Can I ask you, clearly enough, when people are progressing through that course, they are tested and examined and then pass and move on to being constables ultimately. Is that right?
So the probationary cadets are completely different.
I see.
Right, so the probations are the members who have graduated from the police college. And so because of the really large volume of probationers that we had in Alice Springs, I was asked to do some oversight and support of those members, and with Sergeant Wilson, as well as myself and another member were tasked with taking on the cadet program, which is, so the cadet school-based program.
All right, so they are working as cadets with other police officers at that time, or are they still in training?
They're still in school.
Okay, so
School-based
talking about
program.
okay, still in the program. Is there any component of that program that involves an assessment of a person's psychological or personality or temperance?
About the cadet program?
Yes.
Right, they're just like work experience students.
Oh, I see. I apologise. Thank
Yes,
you, Your Honour. I'm
so
at cross purposes.
Yeah, so we have 12 young people that we work, like they apply for the position to be on the course, and they get a Cert 2 and Cert 3 at the end of it. But it was when I was doing it, it was the first year that we were doing the Urara kids. So we had the urban school as well as the Urara boarding school.
Thank you, Ms Vickery. Given my misunderstanding of that, I don't have any...
So it's more than work experience. They're actually obviously doing that Cert 2 or Cert 3,
Yes.
but it's a school-based program.
Yes, I don't need to bother you with that, Ms Vickery. They're all my questions. Thank you.
Hello, Ms Vickery. My name is Julia Pincus. I'm one of the lawyers representing the Walker, Lane and Robertson families. I know a number of the matters I'm going to raise have already been discussed, but I just want to clarify a couple of things. Is that okay?
Sure.
So the first one is on becoming superintendent, were you given any guidance in relation to how you were to assess or how you should be assessing any of the complaints when they came to you? Or was it just sort of accepted practice that you could just accept what had been done? Or did anyone give you any direction about what was expected of you in terms of your assessment?
So you're talking about complaints against police or the use of force stuff?
Any complaints really, but primarily the use of force ones.
Well, there are two different
So-
areas. So the complaint actually comes from a member of the public.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. So once it
Outside
makes its way to you through the senior sergeant,
The use of force or the complaint?
the use of force assessment.
So when you get to the superintendent level, it's just assumed that you know what to do.
Okay. And so you weren't, for example, instructed about what sort of standard or onus of proof that you should be applying in relation to your assessment?
There's a general order that we follow.
Okay. That tells you that. Can you tell me what that says in terms of the onus and standard of proof? No?
Not anymore.
Okay. So yesterday we heard some evidence from another witness that in order to make a finding of an allegation, in relation to an allegation of excessive use of force, there needs to be strong evidence is needed from the complainant. And in your statement, you seem to distinguish between sort of a serious complaint about an assault or something that was a really serious nature versus a lower level of assault complaint. And you've made that distinction without any guidance. And so it seems that...
There is guidance on those. So there's the general order that follow, there's a policy that has the information about CRPs and then there's Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3 complaints against police.
Right, okay. And you put them into those different categories.
So if they're complaints against police that come through PSC, they categorise it.
So you're accepting that categorisation. Yeah, okay.
Well, it's PSC, so they're the people who do it, and otherwise it'll come through the CRP.
So the standard of proof that they use is also in the guidelines as well. So it's just that, so you're, on the basis that you're accepting their findings, did you know what process they use in concluding whether or not the force is justified, or whether to dismiss the complaint?
So, well, there's a policy that covers all of it, and then the investigators in PSC are all qualified detectives.
Okay. Look, it's probably best if I try and explain where I'm heading here, for your benefit and Her Honour's benefit. So the families that we represent are interested in making sure that there is clarity and consistency and transparency in the approach that's taken to the complaints and review process. And our current thinking, and this is very much a sort of a work in progress for which we'd love your input, is that it should be clear that those people like yourself who are having to review the complaints are very aware of the onus, who holds the onus and the standard of proof that needs to be applied. And so then this then dictates the necessary steps that need to be taken in the process, for example, whether or not the complainant needs to be interviewed, etc. So I was just wondering whether you have any feel, or you can indicate what level of satisfaction you think should be ascertained in relation to that finding of whether or not the level of force was justified.
So anytime we have whether it's a CRP or a complaint, we always have to speak to the victim. Mm-hmm. And if there are witnesses, then we talk to the witnesses as well. And then we talk to the members, and then depending on the seriousness of what the allegation is, they may be subject to a directed interview. Uh-huh. So it's it's not a statement, it's a proper record of interview. And they're directed to answer the questions. And then based on all of that information, then we draw a conclusion, and we would look at body worn, and we would look at any other sort of information that is available. So if there was CCTV or anything like that.
But in terms of reaching that conclusion, do you know what the sort of standard of proof that is applied? I'm not sure how familiar you are with the concepts of, whether it's on the balance of probabilities or beyond reasonable doubt or some other standard.
Well, because it's not like it's not a criminal investigation.
No, I understand that.
Look, I couldn't tell you if that's in the policy or not at the moment now.
Okay. I mean, one thing that we were thinking was that it to apply what is known as the Briginshaw standard, which is namely, in essence, that the more serious the evidence, the more substantial proof that's required. What do you think of that as a proposal?
Well, I think that if we've got information that the members have agreed to either discipline or committed an offence, then they would be found to have to have breached it, and then they would have to be, there'd be either disciplinary action, or if it was found that they had committed a criminal act, then they would be, a file would go up to DPP for an opinion.
Okay.
Probably not helping you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you for your input. Just moving on to another topic. On page 8 of your second statement, you talk about how that you were going back and looking at the use of force of other members, and the use of force wasn't deemed excessive. I'm not sure if you have your statement there. I was just wondering which. So hang on, which? It was your second statement, page 8, if you've got it in front of you.
Yeah.
you got that one? Can you see?
Taking a while to scroll up.
I think it's about 2/3 of the way down.
You loves the All right, so which one are you talking about?
So you say, Lee Morgan asks you, were there any other actions taken, any remedial advice or conversation with Rolf around the way he does his business? And then you go on to say none of that point. So, as I said, so when we sort of were going back and, you know, looking at the use of force in the other members and that sort of thing that were involved, you know, the use of force they were using, you know, wasn't deemed to be excessive. I'm just wondering, was this after the 9th of November you were looking at the other use of force and the other members of the IOT, or who are the members you're looking at there?
I don't even remember now.
You don't? Okay.
That's a bit of a hot mess, that conversation, wasn't it?
Okay, so you can't give us any information about what was looked at there?
Just going back to the other page just to see if I can.
That's okay, Ms. Vickery, if you're not sure what that's about, that's fine. Moving on in relation to funerals, you make a comment in relation to the Kumanjayi Walker's passing, and you say that your understanding was the arrangement was probably to rest after the funeral, and you go on to say that you would have waited for the next day out of respect. And I was just wondering what you're basing that on.
So it was quite a common practice in the remote communities when there was sorry business or funerals, because they are such a, a very important part of their culture, that, if there was something that we needed to arrest somebody for, we would talk to the elders and say that, we needed to arrest that person, and then they would, no, not me, the members, and then they would, with the elders, would come up with a plan about, and the elders would give an undertaking that they would present that person. It didn't always happen. That would be a big, but.
No, thank you. I was more specifically asking about sort of the understanding of the concept of after the funeral, and sort of bearing in mind the awareness that Indigenous people, especially in communities, have a little regard for the precise time, and whether or not there's a sort of widely held understanding of how long you should wait, or whether that was just your personal view.
I think it would depend on the circumstances, but given the circumstances of what had happened with Kumanjayi Walker and the seriousness of the previous incident, that the members would have been talking to the elders about, and the elders I think had come to an agreement that they would present him in the morning. Mm-hmm. That's my understanding. That may not be correct.
Okay, thank you. So the next one is, and this I'm almost finished. You asked about Constable Rolf's background and training, and the first thing you say is, I'm aware that he was previously in the army. Could you tell me how you're aware? Is that just something that was well known, or was there something about him? Was it something that he made very clear, or was it the way he behaved?
I think it was raised during as when that rescue stuff was all going on.
Right. Okay.
Like that first, that was the first interaction that I'd had, and somebody I think had said to me that he'd been in the army previously, and in the debrief I had asked him that as part of his army training, had he done any of those sort of rapid water rescues, and he'd said that no, he hadn't. So I think that's how that came.
Okay. So there was nothing about sort of the way that he behaved
No,
in the patrol group that made it clear? No.
he didn't come in and say, hey, I'm ex-army and look how great I am or something.
Okay. This is my final question. You talk about, in page 9 of statement 1, about feudal, quote, feudal type behaviour amongst Aboriginal people. I just wondered if you can explain what you were referring to there.
Right, so I'd had quite a few experiences as superintendent where I'd had to go into communities where there had been, there's been ongoing feuds between different families within the community, and that have resulted in damage to the community, people being killed or harmed, and then I've sort of had to go in and with members and work with the community to try to resolve that so that people can return to their homes and that sort of thing. And I'm aware that there's been quite a number of those incidents in Unit Move because of family dynamics of the different groups.
And Ms. Vickery, I know this is a difficult question, but one that I'd really ask you to answer truthfully. Do you think as a result of those experiences you developed negative views against Indigenous people based on those interactions? No? No,
I had really, like, you know, when I had gone into those communities after it, because obviously I wasn't there when it was all firing up, but I would be going in after it, and I had, you know, a lot of conversations and community meetings with people, and so absolutely not. I don't hold any sort of negative things around Aboriginal people.
And do you have any personal relationships with Indigenous people outside the workplace?
Yes, 4 of my grandchildren are Indigenous.
Fantastic. Thank you. No further questions.
Your Honour, I'll be brief in time. Ms Vickery, my name is Luke, Officer 8 for Constable Golf. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you, but for some reason I've got a thing up on my screen that's blocking your face, but that's okay, I can hear you.
All right, well, you're not missing much, I can tell you. Ms Vickery, I just want to talk briefly about use of force. You're aware of a Southern Desert Division daily synopsis?
Yes.
And that sets out the previous day / evening's events for the next members that come on to shift. That's the purpose of that document?
Yes, from memory.
And as part of information sharing, you have documents which divulge who might be a priority arrest target.
Yes.
Arrest targets generally.
Yes.
Warrant targets.
Yes.
And bail targets.
Yes.
And that follows a TCG meeting, is that right?
Yes.
A tasking and coordination group.
Yes.
And we heard some evidence yesterday that those documents are shared, is it weekly as opposed to daily?
Yeah, that's the TCG is a weekly document.
And the information we had from witness Alistair Gould yesterday in relation to all of those targets, on my count on that list, there was about 15 people who were either on a bail warrant or arrest target collectively.
Okay.
Is that an unusual number?
No.
It could be higher on different occasions?
Can be higher or lower depending on what's been happening.
And so when you gave
So
some evidence...
that's for the Southern Desert area. So that's not just one station, that's multiple stations.
Sure. And you gave some evidence earlier to Councillor Sisting that in the 3 years that Constable Rolfe had been a police officer, his involvement in 46 use of force incidents wasn't an unusually high number. You recall that evidence?
Yes.
And if 22 of those occasions were involving the utilisation of use of force options such as handcuffs, baton, OC spray or a firearm. Do you agree that that is not an unusually high number?
Well, every one time we arrest someone, they have to handcuff them. So no, that's not unusual.
Yes, and so context is entirely relevant, isn't it, when you assess someone's use of force history?
The context is really important.
I just want to talk about police complaints, and I'm talking about CAPs, so complaints against police, as opposed to the separate issue of use of force incidents. If someone was to have a complaint against police in 2017, 2 in 2018, and 2 in 2019, 4 of which involve the use of force, is that an unusually high number?
No, I'd say that's an exceptional number.
Because part of policing, or a byproduct of it, is it not, is that you're going to get a complaint as a police officer.
Invariably.
Invariably. You've seen police officers with a number of complaints higher than that number?
Yes.
And just on the topic of complaints against police, and tell me if you can or can't answer this, when a complaint against police is made, there's oversight from the Ombudsman the entire way through the complaint, isn't there?
Yes, that's correct.
And so if a complaint against police is made in specific terms, those specific terms don't limit the nature of the investigation. In other words, if someone views particular body worn and the complaint is completely separate to something they see on the body worn and think that's not quite right, they're not precluded or restricted from looking at or raising further issues that arise from that complaint, are they?
So what often happens is, it's something that wasn't always appreciated, was that a complaint would be made about a specific issue, like an issue about complaint of assault, and then they would do the investigation, and then they would find other ancillary matters that they picked up that may have been a breach of policy or hadn't been done in accordance to an SOP, and then the members would be given remedial advice in relation to those matters, even if the other matter was found not to be substantiated.
Yes, and because a complaint against police has the mechanism of Ombudsman oversight, that's an independent body who's also looking at the complaint at the same time as Northern Territory Police, isn't it?
Yes, and I believe ICAC also do it now as well.
Sure, I'm talking between 2017 and 2019.
Yeah.
And there's also the ability of the Ombudsman to recategorise a complaint, isn't there?
I believe so, yes.
So something can come in as a CRP and the Ombudsman might say it's a bit more serious than that and recategorise it. Is it something more serious?
Yeah. So they're conversations that happen between the Ombudsman and PSC.
And likewise, if something comes in as a serious complaint and the Ombudsman thinks it's not so serious, they can downgrade it.
Yes, that's right.
And every step of the way, depending on the categorisation, PSC, Northern Territory Police or the Ombudsman have dealings with the complainant.
Yes, that should be.
Should be. And so if a complaint against police is made, all the circumstances are taken into account, context is taken into account, and ultimately at the end of it, there is still that independent oversight of the outcome of a complaint against police by the Ombudsman.
Yes.
And sometimes complaints on their face are serious. And you agree?
Yes.
Sometimes complaints on their face, I think as you mentioned in your statement, common sense tells you that there's nothing to see here.
Yes.
Just want to finish on the topic of Master Gibson. This is the one involving the wheelie bin.
Yes.
You've been taken to that by Councillor Sisting and Mr Bolton SC in relation to the tipping over of the bin and given your opinion on that. What I want to ask you, having regard to the video that you were shown, once he was arrested, or the effect of the arrest and what followed, you saw or you heard, did you not, Constable Rolfe telling he was under arrest?
Yes.
You read him his arrest rights?
Yeah, I couldn't hear it all very well, but I'm assuming that he would have done that.
Would you accept from me that he reads him his arrest rights?
Sure.
Picks him up and walks him away calmly?
Yeah, I thought he told him he was under arrest when he was walking him away, but he might have done it twice.
Sure. My question is there anything at the time in which he is arrested and given and read his rights and taken away that concerns you about Constable Rolfe's conduct in that situation?
No, well, as I said, it was probably not how I would have done it, but you know, he was firm with him, which is not uncommon, but he wasn't rude, and he was professional. And then, as I said, it comes down to the context and what he was thinking at the time. Like anyone can give an opinion about something, but you know, if we weren't there, and it comes down to context.
Yes. So there's one last topic, body-worn video. And there are occasions when Constable Rolfe didn't activate his body-worn video, either when he was apprehending a person himself or when he was with a group of people.
Yeah.
He might not have there might be situations where a member doesn't activate their body-worn video, but other members attending might activate their body-worn video.
Yeah, that's correct.
And you don't know what their body-worn... Sorry?
That's why we tell everybody that's there to do it, in case somebody either forgets, or they might go tap it and it hasn't gone on.
Yes, certainly. But you don't know, as an attending member, what other people's body-worn video is capturing.
That's correct.
Or what it's not capturing.
That's true.
Have a further one.
Yes. Any other questions? Dr. Freckleton?
No, thank you, Ron.
Just very briefly, Ms Vickery, in relation to the question just asked of you, I think you gave evidence, just to clarify, it's not excusable to not turn your body-worn video footage on because you think the same incident might be captured by one of your colleagues, though, is it?
Not as an intentional thing, no.
Because you might not, for example, that body-worn video might not capture the angle that you're approaching the matter from, or approaching the incident from?
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
And in any event, body-worn video footage of somebody else, your colleague, might malfunction or fall off?
Well, that can be, your one can do that as well. So that's why we ask everybody to have it, so that if there is a malfunction of one, then the other one, you've got it on the other one.
In relation to the use of force, it's the case, isn't it, that a simple handcuffing of a suspect is not a matter which required a use of force report. Agree?
Not on its own.
So the 46 odd use of force reports that we had for Constable Rolfe involved something more significant than a simple handcuffing of the suspects, didn't they?
Yeah, so it could have been in relation to his use of defensive tactic hold to ground stabilise someone in order to get them under control, to handcuff them, or they may have been required to use their OC spray or their tasers, or they very rarely use batons anymore. So that there's usually a combination of things that come in when the use of force wins it.
And in the absence of a use of force report, it becomes very difficult, doesn't it, to try and pick up any patterns of excess force? That is, the use of force reports were critical, weren't they, in ensuring?
Yeah, I would imagine so.
Thank you, Anna.
I would imagine.
Look, it's been a long day. Thank you very much again for making yourself available and carefully listening to and answering all those questions. And we will adjourn till tomorrow.
All stand. Coronial Court now stands adjourned.